Okay, so one of the nice things about Eclipse is you can actually have multiple Eclipse installations on your machine, because Eclipse is just a folder with some executable code. It doesn't install like a normal Windows or Mac application with files everywhere. So this is a Eclipse that does not have any of the Android stuff in it, but I can go ahead and show you how to do some of the steps while we're waiting for, it won't even show up now. Yeah, it shouldn't take that long, and I'm really surprised it's even saying that. So we will just wait for that to finish working. So one of the things you might or might not be aware of is Eclipse has a import function over here. You can either go to File, Import, or right-click in this window over here, and you can select Import there also. And by default, some of the versions of Eclipse will have the Git plugin installed, and some of them won't. If the version you have doesn't, you can install that separately. It's not a big issue. But I'll go ahead and show you right now how to import a project into Git. So this will tell you some nice information once you have it set up. So let's start from the beginning, go slow, because I've done this often. I'll just speed through it otherwise. Projects from Git. Next. Existing local repositories. And this will be on the video, so if you can't follow along right now, that's fine. And this is if you already have your Git repo cloned to your machine, which you should. There's where I stored a test repository that I'm going to be showing you guys, at least one of the files or one of the projects. And you hit finish, and this will save your repository in Eclipse, so you can easily go back to that repository quickly. So if your repository is buried in the deep hierarchy of folders, this just saves some time and effort right here. And here I can select import existing projects. I only want these two technically. And so you can select which projects you want to import from right here. Hit next. And finish. So these are going to give tons of errors because it doesn't have Android installed currently, the plugin at least. But all the code is here and we can use it just like normal. And you'll notice right here, Mook app Vandy, that's the name of the repository, and I'm on the master branch. If I made any changes to this repository, you would see a number here of how many excuse me, how many commits ahead of my origin I am. So if you've done commits of your work and you haven't pushed them to, and in your guys' case, GitLab, this will tell you you have 4 commits you haven't pushed yet. So that's a nice little reminder feature that will tell you if you need to update your code to the server. And I'll go ahead and, yeah.
So is that stuff on the left window there, is that actually pulling from GitLab website?
This is pulling directly from the local repository. So that's a good key question. Let me expand upon that. So who here has used SVN or something along that nature, one of the other code? Okay. So use it in one of the previous classes, I take it? Okay. So in that scenario, there is something called a server, and that is well known and defined what a server is. Git is not designed that way. Git is designed as a distributed source code management system, and so therefore every repository, every clone of it is the same. They have the same rights and permissions as the other ones. It just determines who does the importing and merging of code determines which one's master and which one's whatever you want to call it. So in our scenario, we're using GitLab as a backup central sharing location for you to share your code with the TAs and Professor Schmidt. But in reality, there's no difference between the repository stored on GitLab and the repository on your machine, other than when you make changes, obviously. But inherently, the two repositories are equals. There's no master-slave relationship between the two like there is in other source code management systems. So, because you added all of us, as developers to your repository on GitLab, we can all pull and push comments and have equal copies of the repository also. And that's exactly what Professor Schmidt did when he made your comments. He has a script that goes and pulls everybody's repo all at once, just does it in order right when your assignment's due, and then he goes through, does the comments, and then pushes them all up, and everything just quote-unquote magically works. But that that's just a feature of how we're using Git. There's no inherent necessity of GitLab being a central server or something like that. So I would recommend reading a little bit on the GitLab or the Git SCM book. It describes this in detail, and it helps to explain why some of the idiosyncrasies of Git are different from other source code management systems. So that's a good thing to read. And so in this case, like I was saying, I have the repo mookapp Vandy and the branch master. I will go ahead and change a file here. So you will see that these files have a little golden or orange, golden, I guess. It looks like a little, it's the symbol for database. So it means that it's stored in the repo. So if I create a new file also, we'll make a class. You'll notice that it has a question mark here. Can everybody see that what I'm pointing to? Okay, because I have no idea how to zoom on this computer. So that's good. You'll see a little question mark here. This means that the repository doesn't know about this file and it's not currently tracking it. So if you make changes and your current commit is what is known on all of the other repos, then this file won't be tracked. So that's something to be aware of. So here I have this is technically the Git shell bash that you guys were using, but if you watch the video and I described, you can also install the tools into the Windows command prompts, but I recommend you not doing that. I went ahead and did that, so that's what the difference is here. This is the basic Windows command prompt, but it has the Git shell or Git bash. I think it's Git bash now is what they're calling it. Okay, it has the Git bash commands built in, so ls, things like that. So,
if you install Xcode on a Mac, if you ever install Xcode, it automatically puts the Git bash into your shell.
okay. So here, let me do this clear. Okay, well, it doesn't have all the commands. It doesn't have clear. But can you guys see this red text? I'm going to turn it away. So you can now see that this one file has been changed. That's why it says here modified. and it gives the path of the directory. If you want to go ahead and add that, remember apps, where am I? Remember apps. Oh, I remember. So you have to use backslashes in Windows. Okay. So we'll do it here. Git and team. If you look here under team, you right click on your project, you'll have all of your same options. So commit, push to upstream, pull, merge, those types of things. So we can, that's what I was looking for. So here's the caret symbol. This caret symbol shows that I edited the file. It's under here, it's right here to the left of server communications. I hit save, and this file will get it also. So we can add this one file through the UI here. And now we have yet another difference showing here. It shows the star symbol. This means it's ready to be added. Cool. Here's this. So some of this might be rudimentary for some of you, and some of you have never used Git before. So we just want to make sure everybody has the same minimum tool set for how to use these tools. And we'll add this one also. So team, add index. Right click on the project, team, commit. So it wants the first time your username and email. And here's your commit message. Test for in-class demo. So here's your commit and push. So if you want to push, don't think it'll work on this machine right now, but that's only because of the way I pulled the repository. But for you guys, it should definitely work, no problem. And if not, then you might have to point to your SSH keys, but that shouldn't be a difficult path. Let me go ahead and try that. Oh, okay. So you can enter your username and password, and it'll upload it automatically that way too. So if you configure SSH, it'll work through there. So there's that. Let's see if this is. Of course. Yeah. I thought I had this working, but then I realized I didn't quite have it exactly the way I wanted. So interesting. Oh, sorry. I thought somebody said something. There we go. I'll just quickly do this and add the there we go. Sorry about that. Well, I'll just go ahead and install the Eclipse Android tools into this version of Eclipse. So, like I said, you can have multiple copies of Eclipse. And I've had one for a while that hasn't needed updated, so I haven't had to play around with this in a long time. So, anyways, can anybody describe to me what a activity is? Any volunteers?
It's the embodiment of kind of like the UI and the main thread and all the execution that you try to get done on the main thread and showing the interaction between UI and
Okay, that's actually a very good description, because the only thing you want running on an activity is UI components. Anything that takes longer than 5 seconds will hard crash your application. So that's obviously a bad thing. Let's see. So, yes. Allowances. No. So here's the manifest file. Did he discuss the manifest file? No? Okay. What's your question? Okay. So again, like the distributed nature of Git, a commit is when you're saving all of your changes as a logical unit of tracking. So you say you've edited like 5 files. You've added them all to your temporary workspace for files that you want committed, and then you do what's called the commit, and that actually makes a timestamp of and a difference file between your last commit and this commit. And so that commit is what you can actually share between repositories. So you have to do a commit to save your files locally, if you're going to share them or not. That way you can backtrack to that commit. A push is pushing all of your commits up to a different repository. Oh yes. So if you let's say you write a README file, you add that, you do a commit, then you write your the skeleton of what you think is going to be your assignment, and you commit all of those. Then you write, you fill in the inner parts of what you think needs to be there, and you do that commit. And then you start writing your unit test, and you do that commit, or whatever the case may be. So you can have multiple commits, and that way you can look back even on your local machine before you push anything and see, well, where did I delete this file, or when did I add this file? And then when you push them, the remote server will get all of your commits, the entire history of all the changes you've made. I'm sorry, what? Correct. So this manifest file is what actually is the glue that binds all of your application components together. Let's see. This should be self-explanatory. Uses SDK, so it sets the minimum the target, and I believe you can even set maximum, and there might be a couple other options in there, but I know there's those three at least. And let's see. Scroll down. Uses permissions. These are when you install an application on the App Store. You know how it tells you this application is requesting permissions to use X, Y, and Z. So full internet access to know what your device is, and let's say the wireless card. If it wants those three sets of access, then they will be listed here, and this is how you give access. So these here are record audio, access find location. So course location is generally what zip code you're in or what area around a cell tower you're in. So it's just I'm generally in the north side of Nashville or that type of location. Find location is your exact GPS location or as accurate as it can get. Accounts and write sync settings, those are something associated with sync adapters. Most applications won't have that. But write external storage. If you try to write an application that writes to the SD card and you don't have this permission, it will crash when you try to access the file. So, and it won't tell you that's why it's crashing. It just says permission denied, and you'll be like, why? And you won't understand. You won't make sense of it for a while until you realize, oh, I never gave the permission. I've done that a lot myself, unfortunately. On this one, internet. So anything that's using any type of internet connectivity, you have to give this permission. And so if you don't, your application will just crash.
Is that like, so if you want to have like, get course or time location, you also have to have internet?
No. So GPS uses a different antenna in your phone.
Okay.
So you can, GPS uses, I'm going to say wrong, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, 20 hertz.
So if you want to produce that on like a Google Maps app.
So if you have the Google Map data cached, then you don't need internet. So you can actually, this is an advanced thing, but you can overlay your own tiles of data. So if you want your own map, you can do that. So, so the internet and find location, camera, and write external storage. Those are basically the ones that you'll probably ever run into in a common occurrence. Some of the other ones will be more specific, and you'll know that you need them because when you go look to see how to use the library, it'll say, you need these. And you have to use them or you can't do what you're wanting to do. So
all these need to be specified manually?
Yes. So when semi-manually. Oh, wow, this is new. Oh, I see, because I don't have the plugin. Yeah, I would always just use the text editor when it comes to these XML files in Android. I don't particularly care for the built-in tools. They kind of just make it harder than it needs to be. So you'll learn that this is the string that you need, and you'll just copy and paste it into this file when you need it. And that's the end sum of it, basically. Uses features, that's another thing that you don't have to worry about for this class. But here's one that's important, application. So this application defines the components of, quote, your application. So if you have activities in your source code and they're not defined in this list here, and you try to run them, Android is going to say no and crash your application because you did not define them in the manifest file, so therefore they're rogue activities. They're not defined and they're not registered with what's called the application manager. So the application manager reads this Android manifest file, loads in its data, and that's how applications are actually launched. So if you need to write an activity, like here, that is listed on the home screen, this is how you do it. You have a name, a label, and an intent filter. So this is how we'll get into intents. Intent filters are how the Android platform launch components of a application, whether it be a activity, a content, whether it be an activity, a service, or a broadcast receiver. Content providers are accessed in a different way, but those are separate. And this action, this here is just one of those things that you'll copy and paste. If you want it on the home screen as a main launcher of an application, you will need this here inside an intent filter. So your application, I believe the one that he gave you will have one of these in it. All applications have to have at least one, unless they're doing something funky, but we won't get into those weird scenarios. And then if you have other activities that you don't want listed on the main launcher, but you do want to be able to use them, all you have to do is have an activity with a name that points to the file. So very simple. It's just you have to remember to do it. It's one of those housekeeping things. You have to remember to do it, or else your application is going to crash when it tries to launch that activity.
So every single different view or activity is going to need one of these.
So every activity. Views are, so view is a class in Android, and anything that you see is a subclass of view. So text, buttons, everything, it's a subclass of view. And then activity is a special thing that it's part of the Android framework. And then you can put either fragments, which you'll get to in the end of the semester, or UI components in a Android file into the activity. So, I'm sorry, what? Oh yeah. So the action is this describes that. Forget what term they use, but great thing about Android action. Let's get their exact definition. All right, not very useful. So the action is what will actually happen. How do you get to here? Intent filters work a little different. So you're familiar with a spam filter, right? On email, everybody, I assume spam filters, you get that. You make a special filter and it says, you know what, actually a better example might be Gmail. All undergraduates have Gmail, right? Is that correct? Okay. So you have labels, and you can set filters for labels. And so you set a filter, and you say, all of my Vanderbilt email I want to label as Vanderbilt. And you can set that, and what it'll do is when you receive an email, it'll pass it through all the filters, and it'll say, oh, this one matches Vanderbilt, the filter for that, and I'll add this label to the email. This works in a similar way. The action is, this is sort of a white list instead of a black list. So a spam filter is a black list. That's why I didn't want to give that example. So this is what type of action you want to happen, and this is what you want to do the action, loosely. I forget exactly how they define it, but that's essentially what it boils down to. Is you want this placed in the launcher, and you want it in the launcher is the main home screen, if I haven't mentioned that. But if you want it in the launcher and you want it to be the main activity that is launched, you put this. So This unit right here, you'll just copy and paste most of the time. You'll almost never make a change to it because it just goes together as a unit. So you can create your own custom intent filters, and that's something that's possibly even beyond the scope of this class. So we won't get into that. That's why I couldn't remember exact order of how they requested. So you can also put comments in these files, and I highly recommend you do that because otherwise these long XML files just get horrendous to look at, and you don't know what you're editing and doing like that. So if you add these comments, makes it easy, and that's saves you a lot of hassle. So I will go ahead and restart this. Are there any questions about the manifest file? So that it's a way of creating a unique identifier. So Vanderbilt is the only organization that would have edu.vu or edu.vanderbilt.anything. So no matter what they put, if they put that in the beginning, they know that there's not going to be any name conflicts. Anybody in the world. But the point is, if Vanderbilt puts edu.vanderbilt.whatever, so cs282.examples, they know, and they meaning both Vanderbilt and everybody else in the world, that name is not going to conflict with anything. That was a big issue with older programming languages, is you would name something, and let's just give an example. So if you made a library to do mathematical calculations and you called something matrix.c, well, that's very common. And even if you put it in a what's called now a namespace, those were added in to help with this name conflict issue. So Java started this, and that's why Android adopted it. Is the for our example, it's the organizational path. So it creates a unique string that only one organization will ever use or can ever use that enables uniqueness. So nobody, nobody will ever have to worry about conflicts of names. So it's a feature to help with issues that arose from older programming languages, basically. No, it doesn't, but you can pretty much put whatever you want in there. So com.example is what's in there by default, and you can use that, but you'll have name conflicts if you ever published your software. Also, doing the unique identifier allows you to create whitelists or blacklists of software on your device so that you can allow, I trust all software from Google. Yeah, whatever. You guys can install whatever you want. I don't trust any software from Vanderbilt. So, I don't know. If you don't want that, you could actually just make a blanket rule easily saying everything that starts with edu.vanderbilt I ignore. And so it helps with filtering and things like that. There's a lot of interwoven reasons why, basically.
Ignore the bin directory?
Yes, you should. And that brings up a good question that I will address here in a second. One.
Is there any other place where the permissions would be other than the manifest?
No.
In the last assignment,
Mm-hmm.
there's
So when you're installing an application for testing and just running it on your local machine, it doesn't require all the permissions. Yeah. So that can actually catch you, and so that's why you want to specifically go through and come on.
In this case, all we're really need to do is launch program.
Yeah, don't use the browser.
Yeah.
But the browser doesn't pass it. Doesn't pass it on to the browser. I guess.
So it depends on what I mean, no matter what, it should have that launcher. Then does it have the launcher code, the launcher intent filter?
Yes.
Okay. So it should, if it's going to the internet, I believe for grad students you have to load the maps through the internet. Is that correct? Is anybody? Okay. So yeah, they will definitely need it. I would assume that maps requires the internet permission. Maybe not because of the local debugging capabilities for just testing software. But if you export the application, it definitely would just crash without that permission.
But is it that kind of passing intent to like the browser?
No. Yeah, that's exactly why. So the browser has access to the internet, and so okay, you're not actually you're not actually creating a what's called an HTML view, are you?
Okay.
No. Okay. So yeah, if you were actually accessing internet resources, then you would need that permission. But if you're calling an application that has that permission, then you don't need that permission also. So that's the access control scheme is a little interesting there. All right. Apparently, the SDK hates me. And hopefully this doesn't take 4 days or whatever it said before. So, cancel. So Professor Schmidt is going to discuss how to, some more about intents, intent filters, services, and broadcast receivers. So I'm going to cover the last main component, which is called content providers. Content providers work different than the other parts of the application. The other parts you directly call and it launches either a background service or background thread or some type to launch a service. You actually see an activity and a broadcast receiver receives broadcasts, hence the name. And so a broadcast receiver can launch activity services and things of that nature. So I remember as an application that we worked on for the last round of MOOCs, the online courses for Coursera. And we will discuss the DB adapter. And we'll ignore all the errors, but the code does work. So does anybody already know what a content provider does? Good.
It's kind of like an abstraction over accessing, database operations.
Good. That's definitely one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is something that stores some type of data. So it doesn't actually have to use a database. That's a common way of implementing it, but it doesn't require it. So a content provider provides a standard way. So the acronym is CRUD: create, read, update, and delete. It provides those mechanisms for content. And the content can be anything ranging from images, movies, contacts, like your list of phone numbers and people in your phone. That is all stored in a content provider. And so if you want to write an application that uses all of your contacts in the phone, all you have to do is ask for the permission to access the contacts, then just use these CRUD, create, read, update, and delete permissions, and access the contacts. And same for images, movies, whatever the case may be, MP3s, like that. And so this file here is one of the canonical ways of creating a database in Android. I'm just going to go at high level. This is a special, this is a string here, and it's create table. This points to a string name, I think, story, and then there's a bunch of syntax. And so that string enables the built-in database system to create a table. And the built-in database system, does anybody already know what that is? Correct. So SQLite is a lightweight database platform or system that allows you to quickly and easily create databases and access them with very low memory overhead and very little CPU utilization. So this string here is the string for creating one of the tables. This is another one to create the tables. They're just static. You'll design your tables to match whatever data you're storing. So what this is storing in particular doesn't matter. The only thing that matters in particular is, you'll see this here, integer primary key auto increment. So if do you guys have a database class that you've already taken or will be taking, or is that an optional course? Okay. So a primary key is, so in Excel you would have a list of rows, and each row would have a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so it's an easy way, and every time you put in data into the table, into the columns of the spreadsheet, same generic idea of how they work, it will automatically increment the new number. And so it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's say you delete 4, the next one will go in as 5. And so you have a unique number for every row of data. So that's how that works. And then you have a database, context, which, have you seen what a context is yet? So context is an Android-specific concept that stores well, it overuses the word context, but it stores your context, which is not very helpful when I'm describing it. But it stores things such as the activity, the user, the process, things of that nature. And there's some more stuff here. Let's see what would be useful. Delete. Okay, so the SQLite interface has the same CRUD operations: open, delete, read, list, and view. So read. And so what you'll do is you'll first write your database, which we'll skip for now. Then you'll write your provider. And your provider is the public wrapper around your database or your internet access, or however your flat file, however you want to store your data. Generally, I would recommend a database, at least for storing metadata about what you're storing. So here's something that's important for content providers. It's called a URI, Universal Resource Indicator. I think that's the acronym. But Identify, yeah, it's one of those acronyms that actually has a lot of what people think it means. So, and an authority. An authority is the string that you would give to get access to a content provider. So if you aren't the content provider, you aren't this application, and you want the contacts, you would give the authority for the contacts. And so the content provider knows what its own authority is. You create the database locally, you open it, so you can do some reads, writes, things of that nature. So if you haven't taken a database class, a query might seem a little weird at first, but it's how you, yet again, another one of those overloaded terms, it's how you query the database. It's how you ask the database about the data that it's storing. So if you have a specific filter, let's take this example. These are stories. So I want all stories that were created in the last 3 days with ID number above 0. And it will give you a list of those back, if there are any. And so that's how you query to find out what information is in the database, or in the content provider. So we'll skip over how it specifically does that. Another I use helper methods, the same name. Insert, if you want to create a new instance of the data. So I want to create a new contact. I would use the insert method to insert that information into the whatever the backend is. In this case, a database. So updates a single row. Delete would delete a row. And so obviously you don't want all applications to have access to delete all of your contacts, because that would be bad. So you have deciding what permissions you'll give and what URIs, which are the indicators or specific strings that locate as either a table or a row in the table, is basically how to think about it. Generically, it points to the table. And if you give it a number at the end, generally it points to the actual row within the table. So that's a simple way of thinking about it. If you do that, you can easily allow somebody to read without being able to delete. So open file. So let's say your content provider was storing MP3s. And you wanted to be able to give a database of MP3s. Well, you don't want to store all the MP3s in a database, because even though they're relatively small for what we use, in a database they're huge. So you would store them on the file on the disk, and then you would point what are called file descriptors, so pointers basically, to the file in the database. And so you would just share that pointer to the file, and they would open the file by calling open file. So it allows the remote activity or service or whatever the case may be to access files that are in your secure location of storage, but only specific files that you give them permission to. So that's what this open file is for. And that's basically the overview of content providers. So content providers can be difficult when you're first starting with them, but once you get used to them, they're very repetitive, and it's just the same code over and over. So a lot of the times you can just copy and paste a lot of the code and just make minor tweaks and use it from there. So they're really nice for partitioning off small amounts of data to applications as they need them. And so let's see. We'll go ahead and cover this. Sync adapters. Sync adapter, I'm not even going to look at the code, so we'll just close this. Because sync adapters, literally half of this file is nothing but handling exceptions. So there's no code in this one. This is just a stub. So Sync adapters are what allow applications like Gmail to synchronize your, well, in this case, email behind the scenes. So every time you write an email, you hit send, it says, oh, I have a new email, I need to send it, and it sends it. Or if you don't have internet access, it obviously doesn't try to access the internet because it has that in particular, Gmail has permission to see whether or not you're connected to the internet. But in the off case, let's say something that's less important, so Twitter or Instagram or something along those lines, that you care about updates but not immediate. You can set your application to say, I only want you to update once an hour, because that'll save battery, that'll save network usage, things along those lines. So a sync adapter is what actually allows an application to synchronize at given intervals and different scenarios. So what those scenarios are and what those timing intervals and all those things are up to the programmer. So the better the application writer, the more customization they give to the user. So a sync adapter is a service that ties into what's called a sync manager. And I think this is a good time to bring up what the managers are. But the sync adapter is a service, and it ties into what's called a sync manager. And the sync manager is what it registers with to say on what conditions it should launch. And so the sync manager is actually what launches the sync adapter. So it's this very back and forth, intertwined relationship between different components to achieve a lot of nuance in how the program operates. So let's say you're Twitter or Tumblr or some one of those big programs. Obviously, you don't want everybody's account hitting your server every minute. That's a waste of bandwidth, a waste of battery, and you don't want to effectively DDoS yourself. So you write in your application, only update when they press the refresh button or once every 15 minutes. So you set in the sync manager, I want to refresh every 15 minutes, roughly. And the sync manager says, okay, I will run all the sync adapters in order when it hits 15 minutes. So at 15-minute mark-ish, it can actually round and do some funny math. But let's just say every 15 minutes, it goes, all right, I want to upload Twitter. I want to update Twitter. I want to update Instagram. I want to upgrade Tumblr. And it'll do them in order, so that way it prioritizes network bandwidth. It's more efficient. You don't use your battery because your phone is in extended sleep or could potentially be in a hibernated state for longer, so saving battery. And it reduces bandwidth because it's not constantly pinging to see if there's new information. So that's what the sync manager does. And so I've mentioned the application manager. There's also a thing called the fragment manager, and I believe content providers have one also, but it might be the application manager that commands those. Android as a platform, because Android's not an operating system like you would think of Windows or even Mac. So Android's a platform. It provides an operating system, which is essentially Linux, with some slight customizations on top of it, but basically still Linux. And then it has these managers to provide features for you. So the access control lists of what applications have access to what permissions. That's the application manager. The application manager decides which applications have what permissions, and if you try to do something it doesn't like, it says no, you die, and it just closes the program. And so that's a good security feature. And so there's a bunch of these managers. I think we can actually get a list of Android managers. No, I don't want to do managers. So yeah. Sometimes you'll have to search for Android. Oh, that's great. There we go. No, that's an application too. Yeah, that's one of the things that's kind of mischievous. People make apps the same name as core features. It's not necessarily great. But so there's Application Manager, which is the big one that you'll be interacting with, but you'll never have to manually like call or use yourself. The manifest file and its defined features will handle that all for you. And so that's just one of those idiosyncrasies. If you go here, yeah. So if you go to the developer's guide, it will give a more detailed explanation of all of these things. I recommend actually going through this and reading and seeing what some of the new features are and looking at things like that, because here's intent filters, activities, services, content providers, widgets. I don't really count those, but those are a different thing. So obviously the widgets are what go on either the home screen when you start the screen or on the launcher itself. So those are widgets. And processes and threads is basically what the majority of this class is going to discuss, is how to run things in background, how the Android platform, you can learn basic advanced operating system concepts from the Android platform. So we're focusing a lot on Android, but the things that you're learning apply to operating systems in general. So yes. So the one last thing I'll cover, what time does this end? 4:30? 4:20? 4:25? Okay. So here's something important that probably, I'm guessing a lot of you didn't use, but that's not a big problem. You'll just get into the habit of it from now on. So if you go under the resource folder of any project, you'll see a values folder. And if not, you can create it. But the values folder holds some things called strings.xml and styles.xml. The important thing here is strings.xml. So this strings.xml is very long, and the reason for that is anytime you have a string in Android, it's best to not embed it in the source code. It's best if you include it in this XML file, because I think it's actually faster to include it in the XML file, because the way it actually, what's called inflate, is how it creates the UI. I think it's actually faster when it reads it from the XML, or there was research into that at one point. But either way, the important reason is actually for not just speed, but it gives you abilities that you don't have otherwise, namely internationalization and adaptability of your software. So your application that you had should at least have, I think, app name and probably menu settings. It at least have app name. But this allows you to create a strings.xml to start with that you'll eventually turn into your US English strings.xml. And then you can take the strings.xml, hand it off to a translator and say, here, translate this to Spanish, French, German, whatever. And all they have to do is they leave these blue names, the string, the key alone, and they just change the value. So if anybody knows what settings is in German or Russian or whatever, we could type it in there. In a separate XML file, have an all German one, all Spanish one. And the application itself will automatically, based on the phone settings, select the right one. So you don't have to do anything, literally nothing. It will just automatically work. And that's really nice from a development standpoint, because you don't therefore have to ask every user, what's your language, and then set the setting and things like that. So whatever their phone is set to. So I'm guessing simplified Chinese or English, American English, or Great British English, which is actually important because the comma and the decimal place are in different places depending on what English language you're using. So it can be rather confusing if you tell somebody it's 999.99 or 99,99. So that's actually rather important. We actually ran into this here at, and we were able to translate an entire application because we had all of our strings in the XML in, I want to say, 16 hours. And that was including the translator going through and translating the strings, the XML file for us to Spanish. So the actual programmer work, maybe 20 minutes. And so it's a big time save. But it also lets you centralize your name. So in this case here, story, view, button, label, delete. Obviously delete. I used kind of silly descriptive names for my strings in this example, but it doesn't hurt to be overly verbose in names. Like as you can see, tags, view, story, list, we go from there. And so you know where the string, what activity it belongs to. The same idea is true for multiple screen resolutions. So you can use the same XML-based layout system or the same XML system for layouts. And so if you have a phone, which is yay big, a small tablet, a large tablet, or a TV, you can have the same code in your Java code and then just different layouts based on the screen size. And so you don't have to change your, so what this does is it separates your presentation layer from your logic layer. And so you as the programmer can worry on the logic, the business end, and you can have somebody who's I would call it a problem, but their job to worry on the UI, how the UI works on different screen resolutions. So, but yeah, that was one of the most top 10 things people missed was having strings in their source code. So if you get in the habit of putting them in the resource files, it'll just save you a lot of hassle in the long run, potentially. Yeah.
Should you also use that for logging, or is it better?
So logging, no. I would recommend, let's see, do I have it here? No, let me find a source code file. So logging, there is here. So private static final string, and I always call this log tag. That's just a convention I've came to using. You can use the name of the class .class.get canonical name. And so what this does is this string here, the name of the class. So if you rename the file through Eclipse, it will automatically rename this here and this here. And so all of your log tag statements will be up to date. It's just a little trick or tip that I personally use, and it just saves me a lot of hassle that way. But so I have here my database adapter constructor. So I wouldn't take those into the XML file because they're not part of the presentation layer. This string belongs in the logic layer because when you compile your code, you'll notice that there's a D here for debug. This won't be included in your final compiled version that you would put out onto the App Store. So this portion here, the .d for debug, whatever warning level you put it at, you can decide later whether or not you want that into your application. But in either case, log files are part of the business logic, not part of the presentation. So the XML files are generally for the presentation layer. And
The syntax for accessing this XML file, for like the strings and everything.
So first of all, if anybody needs to leave, you're welcome to. I'll be here to answer questions if anybody wants. So class is officially over. I'm sorry I went a little over with that, but so in this program, I will show you. Here we go. Come on, where's uncreated?
Oh, I made a few.
Okay, so here's one example. This r.id.details. R is a static class that the Android toolkit will create dynamically from all of the XML files. And so the so r.id, I don't have it in here. But the ID is the name of the ID of the string or whatever. If you go r.layout, it'll give you a list of the layouts. If you go r.bool, it'll give you a list of the booleans. So you can use those for logic determination.
Right.
So one simple example of that is if you have a boolean that's false, except when you are on a screen that is tablet size. And then if it's tablet size, you say, oh, okay, go ahead and load 2 fragments of UI elements. So a list over here and a view over here. And so that's how you use the bool. But yeah, the R is a generated static string that has all of the identifiers and references to all this. So there's different ways of accessing that based on how you're going to use it.
Right, I looked into the R file for like the IDs for like the value by ID
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yeah.
So you have one XML file that's all of your strings, right?
Yeah, you can split it up.
You can.
I'm not exactly sure on the rules of how that works, but I just had one because it was easier for what I was doing. But
Okay, so you don't know this like the syntax, but you do that as possible.
so Android string XML files. Yeah. So as long as it's in the values folder, you can have any string.xml file that follows the same pattern as the strings file.
Are they accessed in a different way? CDR?
No, because Android will automatically convert all of those into that R file. And so,
well, I guess what I mean is so to access like a string with just the one, you just do r.string
Mhm.
dot name. So do you, like, let's say you have 2.
you just have to make sure that there's no names that conflict.
Okay, so you can't have conflicting names. Okay.
So you can have conflicting names if they're in the special English or German that are especially, you have to name the file a certain way. So English for US is US_EN for US English, and then US_ES for Spanish. And so if you do that, then yes, you can have you should need to have the exact same overlap.
But if I wanted to split it up for like, let's say I wanted 2 string files.
Better not call them both button 1.
What is there a function to get that from like that? Like, so you have the ID, the R file, and I have like that, like some address for you. But what's the function to actually generate the string from that?
So it depends on what you're doing.
If I just want a string per error.
So
I actually did not do this. This is one.
I did the same thing.
I embedded the strings, and then whenever Dr. Smith, left the comments.
I'll go ahead and stop the recording and I'll show you.